I had been married for 10 years when I found out my husband was supporting another woman. The most difficult part to accept was that the son he had with her was a year older than our own son. When I finally brought it up, he didn't bother with denials or excuses. Instead, he brought the child to our home, behaving as if it was a perfectly normal thing to do. He even had the audacity to insist that this illegitimate child should have the same rights to inheritance as our son. I looked at him directly and stated, as calmly as I could, "Let's get a divorce. He can have all the money. My son and I don't want any of it." That same day, I packed a few bags for my son and myself, and we left the house, taking nothing else with us. There was something I knew that he didn't. In exactly 1 week, his company was scheduled to file for bankruptcy. He was also personally submerged in an immense amount of debt. Today, I had just gotten home from my office when I found my son, Leo, sitting by himself on the living room sofa, quietly trying to wipe tears from his face. I hurried over to him, and as I got closer, I could see his clothes were smeared with dirt. I knelt down beside him and softly asked what was wrong. He immediately fell into my arms, sobbing uncontrollably as he managed to say, "I hate Daddy." Just then, Mark Peterson, my husband, heard him and his temper flared. "What are you crying about?" he yelled. "You hate me. I provide your food, I buy your clothes, and this is the thanks I get? You're an ungrateful little brat." Standing just behind him was another boy, about Leo's age, who began clapping his hands and laughing. "Ungrateful brat! Ungrateful brat!" he chanted with delight. It was obvious what had taken place while I was gone. The other woman's child had been bullying my son. That boy was Mark Peterson's son with his mistress, Chloe Reed. And yes, he was older than Leo. Only 3 days after I had revealed my knowledge of the affair, Mark had moved both of them into our family home. Then Chloe had the nerve to chime in, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Kevin, don't say things like that. You need to apologize to your little brother. Just look at the mess you've made of his clothes." Chloe had been calling herself my sister from the moment she walked into this house. I paid no attention to either of them and focused all my energy on comforting my son. "Leo," I said gently, "what has Mommy always told you? What are we supposed to do when someone tries to bully us?" Leo looked up at me, then pulled away from my embrace. He took several steps toward the three of them, then paused to look back at me for confirmation. I gave him a slight, encouraging nod. Without any more hesitation, my son grabbed the other boy's arm, deftly hooked his foot around the boy's ankle, and executed a perfect shoulder throw, sending him to the floor. Mark and Chloe both screamed in shock, demanding to know what kind of child I was raising. Leo stood his ground, his small voice filled with a new firmness. "If nobody bothers me, I won't bother them. But if someone hurts me, I will make them pay for it." Mark's face turned a deep red with fury, and he started yelling at Leo, calling him a disgrace and accusing him of having no manners. I looked Mark straight in the eye. "If he lacks manners," I said evenly, "perhaps it's because his father has failed to set a proper example." The house devolved into chaos, sounding less like a home and more like a crowded, noisy market. "Sarah!" Mark shouted. "Just look at your son, a boy who behaves like this. There is no way I would ever let him inherit my company. Thank goodness I still have Kevin." It wasn't the first time he had threatened this. When he moved Chloe and her son in, he told me quite clearly that the boy would have inheritance rights and would be treated as his own. I almost wanted to laugh, as if his crumbling company and the few remaining assets he had were something worth fighting over. I had remained silent before because there were still matters I needed to arrange. But now that he was behaving so outrageously, I decided that I had tolerated enough. So, once more, I said clearly, "Let's get a divorce. He can have all the money. My son and I will leave." Chloe looked momentarily stunned, but her expression quickly shifted to one of feigned pity. "Sister," she said softly, "I truly never wanted to get in between you and Mark." Mark, ever the self-important man, waved a dismissive hand and shouted, "Fine, a divorce it is. Anyone who backs out now is a coward." I added one more condition. I wanted Leo to legally sever all connections with Mark. From that point forward, any debts or financial troubles connected to him would have absolutely nothing to do with me or my son. Of course, they agreed. Chloe, in particular, was visibly thrilled at the thought of having one less heir to divide the assets with. After the divorce papers were officially signed, I picked Leo up in my arms and spun around with joy right there in the civil affairs office. Mom, he asked, looking curious, why are you so happy even though you got divorced? I smiled, kissed his forehead, and whispered, because in 1 week, your daddy is going to be completely bankrupt. Mark Peterson's company was about to face an investigation by the prosecutor's office. The business was set to collapse under a mountain of debt. Bankruptcy was his only possible outcome. And the reason for all of this? It was entirely my doing. From the first day I learned Mark was cheating on me, I had known. But I pretended I saw nothing, quietly continuing my role as Mrs. Peterson. All the while, behind the scenes, I had already started the process of transferring the company's core assets elsewhere. After all, it was my family, the Vances, who had provided the resources and connections to help him build his empire in the first place. As the saying goes, even a dying camel is larger than a horse. The day after my divorce from Mark was finalized, I was called to my son's school by his teacher. Leo attended a very exclusive private academy where the vast majority of the students came from extremely powerful and wealthy families. They were the children of high-ranking government officials, business magnates, or heirs to massive real estate fortunes. As soon as I arrived, Leo ran to me, his face streaked with tears. His sobs were deep and painful to hear. I checked him over carefully. There were no obvious injuries, but his clothes and shoes were completely soaked and dirty. I gently asked him, "What happened, sweetheart?" Leo just clung to me, crying, "Mom!" A sneering voice came from the corner of the office. I turned to see her, Mark's mistress, sitting on the office sofa with several other children standing near her. She was dressed in a way that screamed cheap fashion, her long red nails flashing under the office lights. The teacher began to explain, in a tone that was clearly accusatory, that my son had physically attacked the other children and had specifically targeted Chloe Reed's child. I looked at the boy. He was missing 2 of his front teeth. That was all. I calmly asked Leo to tell me what had happened. Before he could get a word out, the teacher interrupted. It was Leo who started the fight. I turned to her, my voice cold. I was not speaking to you. As an educator, you should be aware of what is appropriate to say in front of children and what is not. You should learn your place. Then, I glanced over at Chloe Reed. I know this school has a very high tuition and prides itself on its resources. I just never expected the quality of the teachers to be on par with that of department store sales clerks. The teacher was left speechless. Leo wiped the tears from his eyes and started to explain. They locked me in the bathroom, he said, his voice trembling. They poured dirty water all over me. They told me that nobody wanted me, that I was a child that no one cared about. He choked on his words. Kevin Peterson said that Dad hated me, that everyone hated me, and that it was my fault you and Dad got divorced. As soon as he finished speaking, Chloe jumped to her feet and reached for my son's arm. Without a moment's hesitation, I slapped her hand away. "Keep your filthy hands off my child," I snapped. The teacher quickly stepped between us, trying to de-escalate the situation. "Oh my, it seems this was all just a misunderstanding." She then turned to Leo and started to lecture him. "Still, Leo, no matter what happened, it's not right to use violence." I pulled out my phone and started to dial a number as I spoke. "Right. So next time your own child gets his head shoved into a toilet, just teach him to say please and thank you while it's happening." Realizing she was out of her depth, Chloe started frantically calling the other parents who were involved, and she even called Mark. What she didn't anticipate, however, was that I personally knew every single one of those parents. Once they arrived and I explained what had actually occurred, it became clear that their children had been instigated by Kevin Peterson to bully my son. One by one, they brought their children forward to apologize to Leo. One parent even turned to Chloe and Mark and said bluntly, "From now on, my child will be staying far away from Kevin Peterson." Soon enough, every other issue was resolved. All that was left was dealing with Kevin Peterson. When Mark Peterson finally arrived, he sat down on the sofa as if he were an emperor holding court, while I stood across from him with my son in my arms. Mark said in a dismissive tone, "Kids get into fights. It's perfectly normal. They should just shake hands and apologize. It's not a big deal. Then he looked at my son and said, Leo, you're the younger one. Have you ever heard of respecting your elders? Go on, shake hands with your big brother. Leo looked at me, uncertain of what to do. I shook my head and said softly, No, we are not going to do that. What nonsense. Since when is some old saying about sharing meant to be an excuse for bullying? The homeroom teacher, who had been standing by silently, suddenly looked shocked the moment she realized that Leo and Kevin Peterson were half-brothers. From that point on, she just stood there quietly, trying to be invisible. I let out a small laugh. You really didn't pay attention in school, did you? Just throwing out idioms without understanding what they mean. I continued mockingly. Next, you'll be asking Kevin Peterson to carry a bundle of thorny branches on his back and beg for forgiveness. Should I go find some sticks for Leo to hit him with? Mark's face flushed with anger as he pointed a trembling finger at me. You. Just then, Chloe gently patted Mark's back, playing her part as the calm and reasonable mediator. At that moment, the door to the office opened. It was the school principal. Everyone in the room, including Mark Peterson, immediately stood up. To be the head of one of the top private schools in the capital, the principal was obviously a very influential person. When Leo had first enrolled, Mark had tried to use every connection he had to get him in, but had failed. In the end, it was my father who had made the arrangements. Principal, what brings you here today? Mark asked, trying to sound respectful. The principal casually waved the homeroom teacher away, indicating her presence was no longer needed, then walked directly toward me. He completely ignored Mark's outstretched hand and slight bow. Miss Sarah Vance, he greeted me warmly. It has been a while. I trust you've been well. I shook his hand politely, catching a glimpse of Mark's face, now red with embarrassment, and the stunned look on Chloe's face. I have been well, thank you, I replied with a small smile. The principal then asked, And how is your father these days? He is doing very well, I said. Just the other day he was mentioning he wanted to go for a hike. Our conversation was brief, but it communicated everything that was necessary. Everyone in the room now understood exactly who held the real power and influence. I was hoping to discuss a potential donation to the school's new building project with you, the principal continued. As it happens, I was on campus when I heard there was some sort of trouble involving your son. He then turned and gently patted Leo's head. He's certainly grown taller, hasn't he? He said with a kind smile. Then he asked the teacher for the details of what had transpired. The teacher, clearly experienced in navigating these kinds of delicate situations, quickly explained that it was just a minor disagreement between children and that Leo had, in fact, been the one who was bullied. Afterward, Kevin Peterson was quietly transferred to a different class, the so-called standard class, which was, in reality, filled with children from much more modest family backgrounds. As we walked out of the office, Mark's face was twisted with rage. He hissed at me. Where did you get the money to donate a building? Don't you dare come asking me for help. You were the one who insisted on leaving with nothing. It was laughable. He was barely able to manage his own finances, yet he was still trying to act like a powerful man in front of women. Chloe Reed had been quiet until then, but when she heard Mark's words, she immediately chimed in. Sister, please don't put on a performance just to save face. Children learn from their parents. Vanity is not a trait you want to pass down. I folded my arms, looked at both of them, and then waved my hand in front of my nose as if smelling something foul. Did you two eat raw garlic before you came here? The smell is unbearable. I walked up to Chloe and said, Maybe you should take a good look at yourself in the mirror before you start lecturing other people about vanity. Do you even know what the word means? Right at that moment, a sleek black Lamborghini pulled up to the curb in front of us. I got into the car with composure, allowing the wind from our departure to leave them standing in a cloud of exhaust. My cousin, Daniel Vance, was driving. In his 30s and still happily unmarried, his one true passion in life was sports cars. He laughed and said, Did you see the look on their faces back there, Sarah? Absolutely priceless. Not long after, my phone was flooded with a series of angry text messages from Mark Peterson. So, you found someone new the moment we got divorced. No wonder you didn't ask for a single cent. You've got yourself a rich young boyfriend, huh? He kept sending messages without stopping. Daniel casually took my phone, snapped a quick selfie of himself, and sent it back to Mark with a message that read, "Wow, a grumpy old man with no class still thinks he can have it all." The new semester had just started, and I decided to take Leo out shopping for some art supplies he needed, like paintbrushes and colors. On a whim, I also invited Daniel Vance to come along as a way of thanking him for helping me embarrass Mark and Chloe the other day. We had only just walked into the shopping mall when Leo noticed a pair of shoes he really liked. He had only been looking at them for a few seconds when someone else snatched them away. A sharp, unpleasant voice called out, "I thought the Vance family was finished. What are you doing bringing your child into a luxury store?" It was Chloe Reed, as foolish as ever. It was true that the Vance family had lost some of its political standing, but in the worlds of business and high society, we were still a very powerful force. The boutique's sales associate looked between the two of us and spoke politely. "I'm very sorry, but this pair of shoes was selected first by this lady here." Chloe's face contorted with anger. She threw the shoes at the associate. "Who do you think you are to talk to me like that? I am a VIP customer at this store." Her outburst attracted the attention of everyone nearby. Other customers started whispering among themselves. Some didn't even bother to hide their disdain. What kind of person behaves that way in public? These days, anyone with a little money thinks they can act like royalty. Even someone as dense as Chloe could sense she was being insulted. She stuck her neck out and started yelling back at the other customers, as if that would somehow improve the situation. Daniel stood beside me, thoroughly amused by the spectacle. He leaned in and whispered, "So, this is your ex-husband's new woman?" "She's not his wife yet," I replied calmly. "They haven't legally registered their marriage." He nodded, a grin spreading across his face. "Ah, I see. She took over someone else's home but still hasn't managed to earn the title." At that moment, Mark Peterson arrived. The sight of Chloe throwing a public tantrum clearly embarrassed him. He tried to pull her aside, but she angrily shoved him away. Her once styled hair was now a mess, and one of her dangling earrings fell off during the struggle, clattering to the marble floor. She no longer looked like the composed, elegant woman she tried so hard to be. "Mark Peterson," she cried out. "Are you going to help me or not? Your ex-wife and all these other women are ganging up on me." Mark shot a dark look at all of us. Men like him might enjoy having beautiful women on their arm, but they hated losing face more than anything, especially in public. "If you're not coming, I'm leaving without you," he snapped at her. Chloe stumbled along behind him, trying to keep up. As they were leaving, Daniel called out after them in a mock, concerned tone. "Oh dear, Miss Reed. Are you not getting those shoes anymore?" Then he added with a smirk, "Mr. Peterson, not shopping for yourself today? That suit you're wearing looks like it's from last year's collection." A few of the people standing nearby chuckled. Mark turned back and snapped at me. "Sarah, look at this pretty boy you've picked out." He had clearly lost his temper. First, he assumed I was being kept by someone, and now he thought I was the one keeping someone else. I was about to retort, to tell him to stop talking nonsense and go deal with the mountain of debt his company was facing. But just then, Leo spoke up in a clear, innocent voice. My son said, "I thought Mommy and Daddy got divorced because Daddy liked Miss Reed, but it doesn't look like that now. You divorced Mommy, but you still don't take care of Miss Reed." Ah, my dear boy. Mark dragged Chloe away, though she continued to whine about how unfair everything was, and demand that he finally make their marriage official. Of course, I knew they hadn't registered their marriage. The more desperate Chloe became to secure her position, the more foolish her actions became. Knowing her personality, if Mark did marry her, she would show up at my door the very next day to flaunt the marriage certificate. And sure enough, just 4 days after Mark and I had finalized our divorce, Chloe threw a grand party at the Peterson estate. She sent invitations to every influential family in the city. Everyone except me, of course. Naturally, I decided to go anyway. After all, I had a strong feeling that tonight was going to be quite a memorable event. Chloe Reed didn't send me an invitation, but she did invite Daniel Vance. As the owner of the largest luxury car rental company in the city, Daniel was, of course, allowed to bring a guest. When we entered the ballroom together, Chloe's face fell as if a curtain had dropped mid-performance. She forced a smile and said, "Oh dear, I have been so terribly busy lately, I completely forgot to send Miss Sarah Vance an invitation." Then she added with a smirk, "But it's fortunate you came anyway. It seems what Mark said about Miss Vance finding her true love must be true, after all." Her words were deliberately aimed at me, and the implication was obvious. Barely divorced from Mark Peterson, I had already attached myself to someone new. According to her, I was heartless and, morally speaking, no better than she was. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was pitched just right so that nearly everyone in the room could hear her. I turned to her with a calm smile and said, "Miss Reed, I'm sure it was an honest mistake. After all, my last name is Vance, and so is Daniel's. From an ethical standpoint, we are the closest of kin, bound by family to care for one another." Daniel, standing beside me with his usual composed charm, added, "Perhaps Mark misspoke. Or should we be calling you Mrs. Peterson now? Has someone finally climbed her way to the top?" A soft, sarcastic laugh rippled through the crowd, followed by scattered whispers. In the art of the subtle insult, Daniel was just as skilled as Chloe, if not more so. After all, he had grown up by my side, honing his wit in the same social circles. Chloe's smile faltered. She muttered something about a misunderstanding and quickly made her escape, her heels clicking unevenly on the marble floor. As we watched her retreat, Daniel leaned toward me and asked, "Didn't she look just like a cornered mouse?" "Not quite yet," I replied, my tone light but firm. "A woman who destroys a family doesn't get to walk away that easily." Attending Chloe's party was never really about making her look foolish. That would have been far too small of a goal. What I had planned was something much bigger. I wanted the entire Peterson family to fall from grace. The party had only just begun when Mark Peterson made a brief appearance, offering a few polite greetings to guests before leaving abruptly, showing no concern for Chloe's dignity. "It is almost time," a soft voice said beside me. It was Jessica Chen, the chief financial officer of Mark's company and my classmate from graduate school. Back when Mark had dreamed of starting his own business, I had spent a great deal of money and effort to persuade Jessica to leave her previous job and join his venture. Over the years, she had been instrumental in helping him navigate countless financial challenges. She raised her champagne glass to mine. "Tonight," she said, "his company's stock will hit rock bottom." I tapped her glass gently with my own. "Will Miss Reed come out of this unscathed?" Jessica gave me a knowing smile. "Well, she is not without her own connections. Half of the financial district is filled with her old classmates." That was all I needed to hear. Less than an hour later, Jessica made good on her promise. The shares of Mark's company crashed completely. "Another 2 days of this and the Petersons will be finished," she said calmly. Daniel glanced at the sea of red on the trading screen on his phone and shivered dramatically. "It is better to offend a scoundrel than a woman who has been wronged," he muttered. 2 days later, the company was officially bankrupt. Following the collapse, I hosted a grand banquet of my own, inviting all the elite families of the capital, just as Chloe had done before. The only difference was the reason for the celebration. This time, it was for my son, Leo, who had just ranked first in his entire grade at school. Mark showed up as well, but the confident, charming man he had once been was completely gone. The security guards at the door tried to stop him, but he pushed past them, shouting my name in a wild, frantic voice. One of the guards tried to intervene. "Mr. Peterson, is there an urgent matter with Miss Vance?" Mark stormed up to me and grabbed the collar of my dress. "It was you, wasn't it? You ruined me. Everything I had is gone. It had to be you," he roared. "You walked away with nothing. You asked for no money, only a divorce. You must have planned this all along." Gone was the polished, commanding man I had once married. His suit was wrinkled, his pants were stained with something I couldn't identify, and his eyes were bloodshot with a mixture of rage and despair. He had lost everything, and I, standing calmly in the center of it all, simply looked at him, feeling quiet, collected, and utterly finished with him. Cameras flashed wildly around Mark Peterson as a crowd of reporters pushed forward, eager to capture every detail of his public downfall. It was as if the entire world wanted to watch his disgrace unfold on live television. I raised my voice just enough so that the microphones could catch every word. "Mr. Peterson," I said clearly, "you abandoned your wife and your child. When I chose to walk away with nothing but my dignity, without taking a single penny of your money, was I wrong to want to maintain a little bit of pride for myself?" I had a strong feeling that by the next morning, the tabloids would portray me as a woman of principle and honor, perhaps even as a noble figure. In the eyes of those who read the morning gossip columns, Mark Peterson would be cast as the villain who was finally getting what he deserved. In the end, it took 2 security guards to drag him out of the banquet hall. Even as they did, he shouted over his shoulder, swearing that he would make me pay for what I had done. Beside me, Jessica asked quietly, "So what are you planning to do next?" I brushed the dust off my clothes, then said with a small sigh, "Do you have any idea how expensive this dress is? Just look, that pearl popped right off when Mark grabbed me. I'm heartbroken." Jessica gave a knowing nod. She understood. With all the debt now piling up around Mark Peterson, one more creditor wouldn't make much of a difference. Exactly 1 week after our divorce, it was official. Mark Peterson declared bankruptcy. The Peterson family estate was sealed off by the authorities. According to Daniel, even the luxury cars that Mark had hidden away in his basement were sold to repay what he owed. But it still wasn't enough. One afternoon, I went to pick up Leo from school. As we were leaving, I saw Kevin Peterson standing in the distance. He stood awkwardly by the school gate while the other children walked past, making faces and pointing at him. At that age, children can't always distinguish between right and wrong. They simply mimic what their parents and teachers say. They follow the direction of the wind, wherever it may blow. "Mom?" Leo asked as we walked. "Is it true that Kevin's family went bankrupt?" I nodded. "And it serves them right," he muttered under his breath. Leo had always been very close to me. Ever since Mark had started his affair and began spending less and less time at home, Leo had grown distant from the Peterson side of the family. As we walked together, hand in hand, Leo looked up at me and asked, "When did you first find out that Daddy was cheating?" He was only 7 years old, and yet he was so perceptive. Kevin Peterson was 8, which meant Mark had been cheating for nearly that long, and possibly longer. I had met Mark through an arranged introduction. At that time, the Vance family had just lost a significant amount of its political influence. You could say I was a fallen heiress. The pressure on me to marry was high. While those at the very top of society would no longer consider someone from a declining household, I had no interest in marrying beneath my station either. Mark was just starting his business back then. He seemed promising, full of ambition and charm. I thought that if he truly had potential, perhaps he could help restore the Vance family name. At the very least, he might offer me a stable life. And so, we were married. They say that love can grow over time, and sure enough, within a year of our wedding, I was pregnant with Leo. After my pregnancy began, the Vance family started to regain its standing. Some of our younger relatives began to achieve success in other fields. At the same time, Mark's business also flourished. But as his success grew, he began to come home less and less often. At first, I didn't mind. A missed day here or there seemed harmless. Whenever I played the part of the sweet, lonely wife, he would still drop everything, skip his lunch, or cancel meetings just to come home and see me, even if it was only for a few minutes. But people change. 2 months before I was due to give birth, his phone calls started going unanswered. His business trips became more frequent and his explanations less believable. A woman's intuition can be a terrifyingly accurate thing. One night, someone broke into our underground garage. When the police arrived to investigate, I asked them to check the footage from the car's dash camera. That was when the truth was finally revealed. Mark had been lying all along. Every business trip had been a romantic getaway. Every unanswered phone call was because he was with another woman, who cooed beside him and urged him not to answer his phone. In our social circles, infidelity is almost expected. Some women choose to stay silent for the sake of money or social status. Others choose to walk away before the damage becomes too severe. But what made Mark and Chloe Reed different was their greed. Their ambitions were too large, their appetites too great. and their confidence far too bold. They didn't just want a fling, they wanted to take everything. When Mark Peterson married me, it was perhaps partly because of my appearance, but more importantly, he had his eyes on the connections and resources that I held. Even though my family had fallen on hard times, I had spent over 20 years moving in the upper circles of society. I knew exactly who I might encounter at any given place, what gifts were appropriate for which kind of person, and how to speak in a way that gave others respect while still protecting my own interests. I had mastered these unspoken rules. After the Vance family made a strong comeback, there was no way Mark would ever give up a prize like me for someone like Chloe Reed, who had neither a distinguished name nor social standing. One day, I watched surveillance footage of Mark and Chloe laughing together, their faces full of schemes and ambition. Mark said with a smirk, "Sarah is pregnant now. Once she gives birth, we can proceed with the plan. The Vances are working with me on a few new projects. Once I take control of everything, it will all belong to us." Chloe's voice followed softly. "And what about our son, Kevin? He's almost a year old now. When can he finally call you daddy without having to hide?" Mark gave her a reassuring look and said, "When I have the Vance family completely in my hands, we will all go home together." Chloe then asked, "And Sarah, what about her?" Mark chuckled and replied, "By then, there will be no Sarah." I sat there watching the video, seeing how they had laid out their grand plan, weaving me into their trap and planning to pull the entire Vance family down with me. I asked the police to make a copy of the surveillance tape for me. Then, as they were still speaking my name, everything went black, and I fainted on the spot. Because of the extreme stress from that incident, my son Leo was born prematurely. His health had always been a bit fragile, so I enrolled him in Taekwondo classes at a young age, hoping it would help him grow strong. From then on, whenever Mark came home, I was Mrs. Peterson. But when he didn't come home, I was often sitting across from him at a negotiation table as his business rival. Many times, I was the opponent he had to fear. When the Vance family found out what had happened, they agreed with my approach: wait and watch. At that time, the Vances needed some breathing room to recover, and Mark was still enjoying his moment in the spotlight. As Mrs. Peterson, I shared in half of his power when it came to business interests and negotiations. But everything changed when a new law was passed, granting inheritance rights to illegitimate children. And right around that same time, I uncovered the proof of Mark's affair. That was when he finally dropped his mask and showed his true face. Of course, I had orchestrated all of this deliberately. After all, it is difficult to sleep peacefully next to someone who harbors betrayal in his heart. At first, I thought Mark had nothing left but his debts. I assumed Chloe Reed must have truly loved him if she was willing to stay by his side, even through his financial ruin. But I was wrong. Mark's bankruptcy left him owing a fortune. The financial gap could not be filled even if he sold every car and piece of property he owned. He asked Chloe to sell her luxury handbags and jewelry on the secondhand market, but she refused. The two of them got into a massive fight. Things escalated to the point where Chloe showed up at Mark's old office building, which was already sealed off by the authorities, and somehow managed to slip past the guards. She climbed to the rooftop and threatened to jump if he didn't come to see her. The entire incident became a public spectacle. I couldn't have ignored it even if I wanted to. Later, I heard from a friend, Jessica, that Mark didn't care whether Chloe lived or died. He went ahead and sold her designer goods anyway. In the midst of all the chaos, people in the crowd shouted and pointed. But the only one who was crying was little Kevin Peterson, standing in the crowd and calling for his mother. I had thought that was the end of the story, that the man I had once shared a bed with had finally reached the end of his road. Without money or glory, he had become nothing more than an ordinary man in a crowded world. And I suppose we did love each other once, but even those few memories are now stained by deception and schemes. In the end, he got what he deserved. Chloe had followed Mark for years. She may not have had the official title of wife, but she certainly enjoyed all the luxuries that came with it. Fine clothes, expensive jewelry, even vacations to places most people could only dream of. Now that Mark was bankrupt and drowning in debt, He could no longer support her lavish lifestyle. So, she came to me, clutching a folder of his unpaid bills, wearing an old t-shirt that looked like it had been found at a thrift store. The white fabric was stained with grease. She shouted at me, "Why don't you take care of Mark? You were his lawful wife. How could you be so heartless?" Without saying a word, I pulled out my divorce certificate and held it up in front of her face. Then, I called Mark and told him to come and collect what was left of the mess he had made. After Chloe Reed left, Mark Peterson stood silently in front of me, frozen in place. He said, his voice low and trembling, "Sarah, I know I made the wrong choice. Please forgive me. Help me. I truly don't know what else to do." News of Mark Peterson's bankruptcy had already spread across the entire city. The man who was once known as the powerful antiquer Mr. Peterson was now just another desperate job seeker handing out resumes. During his days of glory, he had made no shortage of enemies. He had built his success by scheming against others, flaunting his influence, and stepping on anyone who stood in his way. Now that he had fallen from grace, it was no surprise that many people were lining up to watch him suffer. And of course, I was not going to be any different. I looked him directly in the eyes and said, "So now you realize you made the wrong choice? Did it really just occur to you now? You made your decision a long time ago. You used me and you used Leo, treating us like pieces in a chess game to help you expand your empire." Mark's expression changed instantly. He tried to speak, to explain, to deny it, but I cut him off. "All right then," I said flatly. "What is it that you want from me?" He stepped forward eagerly. "Not much. Just help me pay off my debts, or be my guarantor so I can get a loan. Give me 2 years. I promise you, I will rise again." Rise again? In his dreams. The truth was, Mark Peterson's downfall came from two things. First, I had quietly dismantled his internal network of support. Second, he was exactly the kind of arrogant, greedy man who always believed he was too smart to fail. He had tricked his lowest-paid employees into signing predatory contracts, knowing they wouldn't understand the fine print. One careless move, and they were trapped. That was his style. Now, as he spoke of his grand comeback, his face lit up with a familiar enthusiasm. His eyes sparkled with that same pride and delusion, as if he truly believed he could reclaim his throne. I asked him calmly, "Do you remember why you were able to get your foot in the door so quickly in this city?" He hesitated. "It was me. It was the Vance family," I reminded him. He gave a sheepish smile, but it quickly disappeared as he folded his arms and launched into a speech about his dreams, his plans, and how the future would prove him right. I was already tired of hearing him talk. A man who had turned his back on loyalty and integrity could never be trusted again, and more importantly, I no longer cared. So, I gave him a choice. He could either accept the small, dead-end project I was offering him, or he could be escorted out by security and never set foot in my company's building again. Back when Mark Peterson still had money and power, he left behind a trail of abandoned projects. After I took over his business assets, I cleaned up most of those messes, paying off what needed to be paid and settling with those who had been wronged. But there was one project that remained, and I couldn't seem to resolve it no matter how hard I tried. It was a residential construction site from years ago. After Mark's business began to boom, he stopped caring about safety regulations or ethics. If a location had profit potential, he would bulldoze it without a second thought and put up another high-rise building. He once set his sights on a plot of land in an old neighborhood. It was supposed to become a luxury shopping center, but one elderly resident refused to move. He just wanted to celebrate his 85th birthday in his home before relocating. It was a perfectly reasonable request, but Mark, hot-headed and full of self-importance, couldn't wait. One night, he drove a bulldozer to the site himself. He had the old man forcibly removed from his home. The shock of the event triggered a heart attack, and the man passed away. Since then, the old man's son had camped out on the site day and night, vowing that Mark would pay for what he had done. The project was completely abandoned. Now, Mark had forgotten all about that incident, as if it had never happened. When I mentioned sending him to oversee that particular site, his face twisted into a look of disbelief. "Sarah," he said, trying to laugh it off, "I'm almost 40 years old. You want me to go out there and be a foreman? That's not really appropriate, is it? He still believed he was Mr. Peterson, seated on the 27th floor of a high rise building, sipping tea with contracts in his hand. I smiled coldly. Oh, then what is it that you want instead? My old office chair, the CEO seat at the Vance Group. Mark rubbed his hands together, squinting slightly as if the idea had never left his heart. He had wanted that seat for a very long time. Well, that might not be such a bad idea, he mumbled to himself. That was enough for me. I called for security to escort him out. Mark panicked and immediately tried to take it back, insisting he would do the project. He had no other choice. If he refused this path, no one else would take him in. Not a single company would risk hiring a man that the entire industry now saw as toxic. He was like a burning piece of coal, too hot to touch and not worth the pain. One afternoon after school, Leo looked up at me and said, "Mom, Kevin Peterson transferred to another school." I wasn't surprised. With Mark Peterson's finances now in ruins, he could no longer afford to keep Kevin enrolled in that elite private academy. Leo frowned. "You're not even shocked." I smiled and said nothing, but clearly Leo hadn't heard the rest of the story. He went on, his voice lowering as if he were sharing a secret. "You probably don't know this, but right before Kevin transferred, his mom came to the school. She took all the money he had on him." The next day, Jessica came to me with more news. Another construction project being managed by Mark Peterson had run into serious trouble. Apparently, when Mark first arrived at the site, he still carried himself like a big shot. But the moment he introduced himself by name, the workers looked at him with open disdain. It turned out that one of the young men working there had lost his mother years ago because of a project that had gone wrong, a project that had been handled by none other than Mark Peterson. The young man still lived in the same small house near the construction site. Recently, Mark found out and decided to pay him a visit. Now you would think he went there to apologize or offer some form of compensation. But no. According to Jessica, the moment Mark stepped inside the house, he looked around and sneered. He glanced around the room and said, "Wow, you still haven't renovated this place. It's just as run down as it was before." I could almost picture the scene, Mark's arrogance filling the air like a bad smell. I asked, "He didn't get punched for saying that?" Jessica raised a finger, telling me to hold on. Not only did he not apologize, he even had the nerve to joke, "You look a lot like your mother. You have the same temper, too." A few days later, it rained. Mark and the crew were taking a smoke break under a makeshift shelter when the young man showed up, carrying a metal rod. Without saying a word, he beat Mark severely. Every single worker at the scene later claimed that they knew nothing about it. When I heard the news, I let out a long, slow breath. In stories like this, the worst part is always seeing good people suffer while the wicked walk free. So when someone finally stands up for themselves, you can't help but feel a sense of relief. After that incident, I shut the entire project down. I sent trained mediators to speak with the young man and offered some financial compensation. The issue quietly faded away. I paid Mark a visit in the hospital. Kevin Peterson was at his bedside, trying to peel an orange for him. The little boy fumbled with the fruit, his fingers slipping, juice running down his hands. Mark scowled. "What are you doing? You can't even peel an orange properly. What use are you?" Though he was lying in bed with an injured leg, Mark's arms were still working just fine. He slapped the back of Kevin's head with a loud thump. The boy burst into tears, clutching his head and sobbing, "I want mommy." As I stepped into the room, Mark turned toward me. "Give the orange to your Aunt Sarah. Let her show you how to peel it." Right. Back when we were still married, I used to peel his fruit for him every day. During our better days, I would cut apples, peel oranges, and even feed him bite by bite. That was then. Now, Mark still didn't seem to know his place. I took the orange and looked at him. "How is your leg?" He grunted. "There will be some lasting damage, but it's nothing serious. That kid is crazy. I didn't even provoke him, and he went off like a mad dog." He paused, then looked at me as if he were sharing a brilliant idea. "Listen, Sarah, I think this could work. Let's do what I said before." I stared at him, confused. "What are you talking about?" "You be my guarantor," he said eagerly. "I'll take out a loan. We can use your car or your house or even your company if we need to, just to back me up." I mean it, Sarah. Give me 2 years, and I swear I will make a comeback. I looked down at the orange in my hand. Then I suddenly reached out, pressed his head back against the pillow, and shoved the entire orange into his mouth. He mumbled and struggled, but I held his hand down firmly. You want me to guarantee a loan for you? Do you think the Vances are fools? Do you think I still love you? Why didn't that young man beat you to death? I have the money. If I wanted to, I could make sure he never sees a single charge. Orange juice dribbled down from the corners of his mouth, soaking into his hospital gown and dripping onto the bed, staining everything with a sticky yellow pulp. I let go and wiped my hand on the blanket. Mark Peterson, I said quietly, you are fired. From now on, do not bother showing up at the Vance Company again. From the very first sentence I spoke to Mark Peterson, he was completely stunned. I looked straight at him and said calmly, you enjoy sneaking around, don't you? Is an entire city not big enough for your games? Then, I added, you love scheming, trying to swallow my family's fortune whole. But in the end, Mark Peterson, it seems I was the one who won. Before I left, I paid no attention to his furious outbursts from the hospital bed. His voice was weak and his curses were frantic. I stopped briefly by Kevin Peterson's side and said, make sure you repeat every word your father and I exchanged today to your mother, word for word. Tell her to stop showing up in front of my house every day. I paused, then added firmly, if she keeps following me, I will have to call the police. Although I was no longer his wife, I had once been Mark's boss. As such, when he got injured during a work-related incident, it was only right that I offer some form of compensation. But instead of sending the money directly to him, I transferred the full amount to Chloe Reed's bank account. I knew her well. A woman who had lived a life of champagne, diamonds, and luxury would never be willing to stay by the side of a man who was now crippled, penniless, and drowning in debt. Besides, Daniel had once told me that he had seen Chloe at certain nightclubs, places that left little to the imagination. Sure enough, the day after she received the money, Chloe Reed disappeared. Daniel asked me, you knew she would take the money and run, yet you still gave it to her. I simply replied, what is owed must be given. If she leaves, let her leave. After all, how far could a woman like her really go? A woman who knew nothing but indulgence. That winter, I received another call from Mark. His voice was low and strained. He said that Chloe Reed had died. Apparently, after taking the money I sent, she had dumped her child on Mark and vanished. It hadn't taken her long to spend everything. Then, with nowhere else to go, she had returned to her old line of work in the nightlife business. That was where she met a wealthy man and became his mistress. But the man was only looking for some fun. When his wife found out, she showed up in a rage, and Chloe was dragged outside and beaten by several people. Later that night, Chloe was assaulted by strangers. Unable to bear the shame and the pain, she took her own life. Mark arranged a small, simple funeral for her. Then, as if he were unsure of what else to do, he called me and asked if I would come. I said nothing. I didn't answer him, but I also didn't hang up the phone. Leo looked at me and asked, Mom, who was that? I smiled faintly and said, just another nuisance call. Then I ended the conversation. From that moment on, I never spoke to Mark again. Sometimes, when chatting with other ladies over afternoon tea, we would gossip about the rise and fall of powerful families in the city, but I never once mentioned his name. He had once climbed to the very top with my help, and then he had crashed down even faster. From time to time, I would hear people mention that they had seen Mark somewhere. Some said he was selling insurance. Others said he had a small street-side stall. That was all fine by me. As long as he never took a single penny from me again, I was satisfied. Occasionally, I would ask Leo, do you ever resent me for what happened? He would always smile and say, Mom, you should be teaching me how to protect myself from people like him. The past is the past. Then he would add with a playful shrug, besides, I should probably thank him a little. Without him, I wouldn't exist. It's fine to keep the son and throw away the father. Mark hid by my side for so many years, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. In return, I took everything from him with ease. It was a small act of revenge. And really, what was the harm in that?